Math. When you need help, you use Minute Math.
Hi, I'm Sean Gannon, and this is Minute Math. And today we're going to learn about multiplying and dividing positive and negative numbers. (10 over 5). And I wanted to find it. Simplify it, basically. Well, I think about how many times does 5 go into 10? Now, we can see that 10, how can I break that down? Well, 10 is the same thing as 5 times 2, and we're still dividing that by 5. So I haven't changed the problem, I just made it look a little different. So now I have 5 times 2, which is equal to 10, and 5 times 2 divided by 5 down here. The 5s can now cancel out, right? We can divide 5 over 5 evenly, perfectly. And now there's 2 left over, and that's our final answer. Negative 24 divided by 12. Okay. And I wanted to find that quotient. Well, we're trying to think how many times does 12 go into 24? If you're quick, it's 2, and our answer is negative 2. But how can we see that? What's really going on? Well, 24 can be broken down to be 2 times 12. So we have a negative 2 on the outside times 12 all over 12. And so now, since we have 12 and 12 with the like terms, we can just cancel them out, right? 12 goes into 12 perfectly, right? Same numbers there. And we're left with just negative 2 in the numerator, and that is our final answer. Negative 20 over negative 2. Okay? Well, I can break this down. I can break the negative 20 down to be 10 times negative 2. Now, why am I doing that? Why isn't the 10 negative? Well, there's a negative 2 in the denominator, so I'm trying to find a way to find a negative 2 in the numerator that I can pull out. Okay? So if I have a negative 2 times 10, like this, in the numerator, the denominator is negative 2. Okay? Well, what happens here, we know that negative 2 times 10 is the same thing as negative 20. I haven't changed the problem. I just made it look a little different. But I made it look different where I can cancel the negative 2 in the denominator with the negative 2 in the numerator. And so now I'm left with my final answer, which is 10. Negative 300 over negative 20. Okay? Well, I'm going to break this down a little differently. Okay? I want to break it down and the numerator to just be negative 1 times 30 times 10. And the denominator to be negative 1 times 2 times 10. Okay? So the reason why I broke this down is I know the zeros. I want to find a way to cancel out the zeros. And eventually you'll be pretty good and you can just cancel out the zeros, seeing it, just being comfortable with it. But what's really going on here is negative 300 is the same thing as negative 1 times 30 times 10. And negative 20 is the same thing as negative 1 times 2 times 10. Well, the 10s, numerator and denominator, we can cancel. The negative 1s, we can cancel out. And now we have 30 divided by 2. Well, what's 30 divided by 2? Do you know? 30 divided by 2 is just 15. And 15 is what's left here, and that's our final answer. 65 over 5. Well, this one I'm going to solve using the traditional method. 5 long division goes into 65. Okay? That's essentially what's going on here. The 65 goes inside this little box kind of thing, and the 5 is on the outside. Well, what we need to decide here is how many times does 5 go into just 6? Well, 5 goes into 6 one time, right? Right, one time. So we now take 1 times 5, which is 5, and now we subtract it. So just subtract that first digit here, or the 10th digit. 6 minus 5 is 1. We then bring down the 5 right here. And now we have to ask how many times does 5 go into 15? 5 goes into 15 3 times. 3 times 5 is 15. We subtract them. 15 minus 15 is 0. Now we're done. And 13 is our final answer right here. Once we have a 0 at the end and we know we're done, right? We can't go anymore. Okay. And then there's other ways to do long division if you don't know, with like remainders or decimals, but that's not covered right here in this video. Negative 66 over negative 6. Okay. Well, The negatives, we know, since there's negative numerator, negative denominator, we can cancel those out. So they're just positives now. So it's 66 divided by 6. Okay? So let's go use a long division method here. Well, 66 divided by 6, we have 6 on the outside and 66 here. Okay? Well, 6 goes into 6 one time, and 1 times 6 is 6. We subtract it, 6 minus 6 is 0, perfect. We bring down this 6, and 6 goes into this 6 one time. 1 times 6 is 6, we subtract it, 0. Now we're done, 11 is our final answer. But that's a lot of 6's. So if we think about 66, we know that can be broken down to be 6 times 11. Well, 6 times 11 divided by 6, the 6's can just cancel. Boom, boom. And now we're left with a final answer of 11. 75 over negative 15. Okay, 75 over negative 15. Well, what we can do is we can break this down to see how many, how can we break it down where things might cancel. Well, 15 breaks down to be 3's and 5's. So why don't we do that? So let's go break down the denominator to be negative 3 times 5. Okay, and actually, while we're at it, let's just do negative 1 on the outside. We don't have to worry about that at the moment. Negative 1 times 3 times 5, right? But the numerator is a little more difficult. So what I'm thinking is maybe, well, 25, 3 and 25, right? 3 and 25. 3 times 25 is 75, okay? Well, I can cancel out my 3's here. And so now I'm left with 25 over negative 1 times 5, okay? So, well, 25, doesn't that break down to be something? 25 is 5 times 5. So now in the numerator, we have 5 times 5 over negative 1 times 5. And now we can cancel this 5 and say this 5. They cancel out, and now we're left with 5 over negative 1. So now we have 5 over negative 1. And 5 over negative 1, 5 divided by negative 1. Well, 5 divided by 1 is just 5. So 5 divided by negative 1, that negative needs to stay there, though, is just negative 5. And there's our final answer. Negative 56 over negative 14. Well, the negatives I can see are going to cancel out instantly, so I'm just going to cancel them out right here. 56, so both become positives, right? A negative divided by a negative is positive. 56 is 8 times 7. And 14, well, that's 2 times 7. Okay? So now, well, 2 times 7, or 8 times 7 and 2 times 7, it's the same thing as 56 over 14, but the 7's now can cancel, right? Divide the 7's from each other. So now I have 8 divided by 2. What's 8 divided by 2? Hopefully you can do that, right? 8 divided by 2 is just 4, and there's our final answer. 102 over negative 17. Now this one is tricky, okay? This one is tricky because 17, that's not a number I can break down. Okay, 17 is really not a number I can break down. So what I'm going to do is just worry about the numerator and see if I can break down the numerator a little bit to see if I get somehow something times 17. Okay, I'm looking for 17 here. So somehow breaking down 102 to have something with a 17 in it. So let's just say, how can we break down 102? Well, 102, I'm going to do it here on the side. 102, 2. 2 is easy. 2 and what's that? 51? 51. Okay. Does anything go into 51? 51. Well, my guess is something times 17 equals 51, right? Something times 17. Well, my guess, 17 here, my guess is, well, 17 times 2 would be 34, right? 34. Plus another 17, so if we have 17 times 2 is 34, and we add another 17 to that, 4, 1, carry 1, 1 right there, and we get 51. And so 17 times 3 is 51. So if you need questions about that, this is 34 is 2 times 17. We just added 17 twice, got 34. And then I had another 17 to get 51, so 3 times 17 is 51. This one was tricky. It's kind of breaking down and thinking about it. So now 102 I can rewrite to be 2 times 3 times 17. And negative 17 I can write as negative 1 times 17. Well, the 17s cancel, right? Now we have that 17 is going to cancel. And the reason why I guessed that they would cancel, because the worksheet here, or the problem, had that out, and it was most likely to be something divided by 17, so that was like my starting guess point, and a good educated guess with it, okay, to help solve this problem. So 17's canceled, and 2 times 3 is just 6, divided by negative 1, and, well, 6 divided by negative 1, we should know by now, is just negative 6, which is our final answer. Negative 72 divided by negative 4. Okay, negative 72 divided by negative 4. Well, the way I like to break this down, because sometimes off the top of my head, you can, it's going to be 18, but the 72 is kind of hard to think about. Oh, okay, how do I get 4 going to 72? And I'm going to show you some methods for that. So what I do is say, okay, 72, I can break down to be, well, 2. 2 obviously goes into it because it's an even number, so 2 times 1 is 72. How can I think about that? Well, 2 goes into 7 3 times, so I can do my little long division here, right? 2, 72. We have 3 times 6 minus 1, bring down the 2, and 2 goes into 12 6 times, and we have 36. And 36 I can break up again to be 2 and 18. Okay? The denominator breaks out to be 2 and 2. So I'm not going to do the full prime factorization here. You can, if you want, you do another 2 and 9, and the 9 to be 3 and 3. But I'm going to leave it. I'm going to leave it as negative 1, right? The negatives, times 2 times 18. And the denominator is just negative 1 times 2 times 2. Okay? Well, the 2's cancel, right? 2, 2, 2, 2, negative 1, negative 1. And our final answer now is 18, and we're good. But if we wanted to practice doing this in our head, and that's the kind of way I do it. I look at this and say, okay, 4 into 72. I don't know that off the top of my head, okay? But I know 4 goes into 80 evenly, right? 4 goes into 80 20 times, right? 20 times 4 is 80. So I think about, okay, if I go into 80, and 4 goes into 80 20 times, right? So 4 goes into 80 20 times, okay? Well, if I subtract another 4 from that, right? So if I go 80 minus 4, I get 76. Well, that's just one less 4, that's 19 times. And 76 minus 4 is 72. So 4 must go into 72 18 times. And that's how I would get that final answer. 153 divided by 17. We're in a little differently here. So 153 divided by 17. Well, how can we solve this? Well, 17 is a prime number. I can't break that down. And so 153, I know I can break down. So we think about 153. I'm pretty sure I can break down, right? And we want to think, okay, what goes into this number? Well, I think 3 does, so I'm going to try that. Okay, that could be wrong. So 3 goes into 153. Well, all right, 3 goes into 15. Well, 3 goes into 15, that's 5 times, right? 5, 3, 15 right here. 0, bring down this 3, and 3 goes into 1. 3 goes into 3 one time, right? And 1 times 3 is 3. Subtract the 0, we're good. So 51 is what I'm looking here, right? 51. So 3 goes into 153 51 times. Okay. Well, 51. Is that divisible by 3? It is. So we have 3, right? So I'm going to rewrite here. 3 goes into 51. Well, 3 goes into 5, right? 1 time. 1 times 3 is 3. We subtracted 5 minus 3 is just 2. Bring down the 1. And 3 goes into 21 7 times. 7 times 3 is 21. We subtract 0. We're good. And so 51 is 3 times 17. And now I'm kind of done breaking it down. So I'm going to rewrite this fraction to 17 in the denominator. It's easier for me to see. And that's division here, because that's really what's going on, right? 153 divided by 17, like this, right? So 17 in the denominator. The numerator, 153, is 3 times 3 times 17. Well, the 17s cancel, and now we're left with 3 times 3, which is just 9. And our final answer is 9. 12 divided by negative 3. 12 divided by negative 3. Well, how would I solve that? Well, 12 divided by negative 3 is the same thing as 12 over negative 3. This one's fairly simple. How many times does 3 go into 12? 3 goes into 12 4 times. So we have 4 over negative 1 is left over. 4 divided by negative 1 is just negative 4. And that's our final answer. 48 divided by 6. Okay? Well, I can rewrite that to be 48 over 6. Okay? Well, if you're quick on the draw, and you know that, well, 48 divided by 6 is just 8 and we're done, that's easy. But to kind of see it out, 48 is, well, that's 8 times 6, right? Over 6. We divide by 6. Well, the 6's cancel, and now we're left with an 8 as our final answer. Negative 120 divided by negative 20. Okay? Well, negative 120 divided by negative 20, I can rewrite that to be negative 120 over negative 20. Well, we're going to break it down. Fairly simple here, right? Negative 120, I can break down to be negative 1 on the outside here. Oops. And then 20, or negative 120, or 120 is easy to be just 12 times 10. And that's what I'm going to break it down as. The denominator, negative 1 on the outside, and 2 times 10. Right, 2 times 10 is 20. Well, the 10's cancel fairly quick. Negative 1's cancel. And now we're left with 12 divided by 2. Well, 12 divided by 2, that's just 6. And that's my final answer. 306 divided by 18. And this one's going to be tricky. Okay? So first step, I'm going to rewrite it as a fraction. Because I prefer to see it as fractions. That's my choice. Some people don't. That's what I prefer. Annoying. 306. Let's start breaking that down. What numbers? Because right now I'm looking at it. I don't have a clue. 306. Breaking down. All right. What goes into it? Well, I know 3 at least goes into 306, right? 3 goes into 300 100 times, right? And 3 goes into 6 2 times, so 102. Okay? So 3 times 102 is 106. We're good to go. Got it right there. So 102, can I break that down? Well, that's an even number. That's 2, right? So 2 and 51. 51 I've dealt with a few times now, right? 3 goes into 51. 3 goes into 51 17 times, okay? So now we have 3 times 2 times 3 times 17, okay? Okay, so how can we, what can we get here? Well, the denominator I can break down. 18 I can break down pretty easily. That's 18, that's what? 18, let's do it here. 18, that's 2 times 9. And 9 is 3 times 3. So now we have 2 times 3 times 3 in the denominator. The numerator is this prime factorization, 2 times 3 times 3 times 17, right? I kind of rearranged it, but 2 times 3 times 3 times 17, the numerator, which is 306, and 2 times 3 times 3 down here, which is 18. 2's cancel, 3's cancel, and we're left with 17, which is our final answer. Negative 65 divided by 13. Okay? Well, I like to write it again as fractions, negative 65 over 13. Well, 13's prime, I can't break that down, but 65 I can. I know 5 goes into it, so I'm going to see how many times does 5 go into 65 like this. Okay? 5 goes into 6 one time, 5 times 1 is 5. Subtract it, 6 minus 5 is 1. Bring down the 5, right here. 5 and 15 is 3, 3 times 5 is 15. Subtracting 0, we're done. And so 65 can be broken down to be negative 1 times 5 times 13, which works out great because the denominator is 13. So now I can just cancel it. 13's cancel, and we're left with negative 1 times 5, which is negative 5. Our final answer. Negative 85 divided by negative 17. Again, I like to see it as a fraction. Negative 85 over negative 17. Negatives cancel, become positive. I'm done with them. I'm not going to deal with it. So now we have 85 and 17. Well, 17's prime. Can't break it down. 85, I can. I know 5 goes into 85. So if I have like an 85 I know 5 goes into it, but I don't know how many times. So I'm going to do some long division here. 5 goes into 85. Well, 5 goes into 8 one time. 1 times 5 is 5. I subtract it, and now I have a 3, right? 8 minus 5 is 3. I'm going to bring down this 5, and 5 goes into 35. Well, how many times does that happen? 5 into 35, oh, that's 7, right? 7. 7 times 5 is 35. Goes in evenly, and we're done. So 5 times 17 is 85. Well, I can't break down 17 anymore, so 5 times 17 is what's left. So 85 is 5 times 17, which works out great because now we just have 17 in the denominator. They cancel, right? The 17s cancel, and now we're left with 5 as our final answer. 128 divided by negative 16. Well, I can rewrite that as a fraction, 128 over negative 16. Well, 128 I want to break down, right? I can't really see this right ahead how many times 16 goes into it. So 128 I can break down. Well, 128, 2 goes into that, right? I always like to use 2, it's just easier. All right, 2 goes into 128, we're looking at 64 times. 64. Well, 64 is easy, that's 8 times 8. Okay? And I'm actually going to stop here. I'm not going to keep breaking it down because I see a 16 in the denominator, and 16 I know I can break down to be, well, that's negative 2 or negative 1. Let's do that, negative 1 times 2 times 8. And the numerator, so far, is just 2 times 8 times 8. I didn't do a full prime factorization. Let's factor it out partly. Well, that's great for me because the 2 cancels here. The 8 cancels. Now we're left with 8 divided by negative 1. Well, 8 divided by negative 1 is negative 8, which is just our final answer. Negative 180 divided by 15. So negative 180 divided by 15. Well, I want to see how I like to write these as fractions. Negative 180 over 15. Well, negative 180, can I break this down? Can I break this down into some factorization here? Well, I can always do it by 2, but I think 5 goes into it, right? Because it ends in a 0. So I know 5. And the reason why I'm choosing 5 is I know 15 is divisible by 5, and I can probably get something canceled out here. Well, 5 into 180. Well, how many times does 5 go into 180? 5 goes into 1 0 times, but 5 goes into 18 3 times, being 15. Subtract that, we're left with a 3 here, bring down the 0, and 5 into 30 is 6. 6 times 5 is 30, 0. So we have 36 here, okay? Well, 36, that's 3, right? 3 times 12. And I'm going to stop there because I know 15 is 5 times 3. So my fraction here, denominator, is 5 times 3. The numerator, negative 1 for the negative. 180, I know is 5 times 3 times 12. 5 times 3 times 12. And now I'm going to start canceling out. The 5 cancels, the 3's cancel, and now we're left with negative 1 times 12, which is a negative 12, our final answer. 234 divided by negative 13. And this one's tricky, okay? Because 13 is always, never my favorite. Those prime numbers are hard for me to divide by. Well, I like to write it as a fraction. So 234, if I can write it out, 234 over negative 13. So 234, I want to break down. Well, quickly, I know 2 goes into it, right? Because 2, it's an even number, and so 2 goes into 234. So let's go figure that out. 2 goes into 234. We're going to cut it in half here. 2 goes into 2 one time. 2. Subtract 2 minus 2 is 0. Bring down to 3. 2 goes into 3 one time. 1 times 2 is 2. Subtract them. 1. Bring down this 4. All right? And 2 times 14, or 2 goes into 14 7 times. That's 7 times 2 is 14. And we're done. 0. So now we have 117. But I'm not convinced. I think 117 can be broken down, right? 117 has to be able to be broken down, okay? And so I'm trying to think, what can I do? Maybe 13 goes into it. How can I break that down? Turns out that 9 goes into 117, okay? So let's go check that out here. I'm going to write right here. 117. Does 9 go into it, okay? And I kind of know this ahead of time, but 9 goes into 11 one time. 1 times 9 is 9. We subtract it. 11 minus 9. 11 minus 9 is 2. Bring down the 7. 9 goes into 27. 3 times. 3 times 9 is 27. Subtract them, we get 0. We're good. 13. So 9 times 13 is 117, and 2 times 117 is 234. So the numerator breaks down, believe it or not, this one was tricky, 2 times 9 times 13. The denominator is just negative 1 times 13. Well, we can cancel the 13s out, and we're left with 2 times 9, which is 18, divided by negative 1, is negative 18. Our final answer. Negative 11 times 9. Now, if I want to solve, or simplify here, negative 11 times 9, I can do the traditional method, right? 11 times 9, knowing that one of them is negative, right? The final answer is going to be negative. So 9 times 1 is 9. And 9 times this one is 9. Bring down the negative. And our answer here is negative 99. Negative 7 times negative 12. Instantly, I see two negatives multiplied together. In my mind, I want to be thinking that two negatives multiplied make a positive. So if I multiply negative 7 times negative 12, that's the same thing as negative 12 times negative 7. Okay? And since two negatives multiply to be a positive, it's just two positive numbers. So 12 times 7. And by the way, we flip that using the commutative property. All right? 7 times 2 is 14, carry the 1. 7 times 1 is 7, plus 1 is 8. And 84 is my final answer. And remember, it's positive, not negative, right? Because two negatives multiply together, right? We see here, two negatives multiply to be a positive. Negative 8 times negative 11. Okay. Well, by the commutative property, I can rewrite that to be a negative 11 times negative 8. Using the traditional method, I have negative 11 times negative 8, and I'll write it one over the other. Now we know two negatives multiply as a positive, so my final answer needs to be positive. Well, 8 times 1 is 8. 8 times this one is 8. Two negatives make a positive, and so our answer here is just 88, and that's our final answer. Negative 6 times 4. Well, this one's fairly simple. We want to think, what is, 6 times 4? That negative, we kind of can just toss it out to the side here, like that. And so we think, well, what's 6 times 4? Well, 6 times 4 is 24. And we know a negative 1, right, negative 6 times 4 is being negative, because that negative 1 times that 6 is negative, but negative 6 times 4, right, is being negative 24. A negative times a positive is a negative. Negative 3 times negative 11. Well, negative 3 times negative 11. That's the same thing using the commutative property as negative 11 times negative 3. So if I want to rewrite this or use the traditional method or classic method, negative 11 times negative 3, we think, okay, 3 times 1 is 3, and 3 times this one is 3. And two negatives multiplied together become positive. So our final answer here is positive 33. Negative 5 times negative 9. Well, instantly we see two negatives that are multiplied together. Two negatives must become positive. When we multiply them together, they become positive, right? And so 5 times 9 is just 45, if you know your times tables. And negative 5 times negative 9 is also positive 45, because two negatives make a positive, right? Two wrongs don't make a right, but two negatives do make a positive when you're multiplying. So 9 times negative 7, okay? Well, remember, 9 times negative 7, or 9 times 7 is 63. But a positive times a negative is a negative. So my final answer here is negative 63. Negative 9 times negative 3. Well, we have here 9 times 3, or not negative 9 times negative 3, but we know that two negatives multiplied together is a positive. Two wrongs don't make a right, but in math, two negatives make a positive. So 9 times 3, or negative 9 times negative 3, is a positive 27. Whatever 9 times 3 is, right? 9 times 3 being 27. We have a positive 27 here. 12 times negative 12. Well, 12 times negative 12, again, is a positive times a negative. So what's a positive times a negative is going to be a negative final answer. Now, if you have 12 times 12 memorized, it's 144. But let's use the traditional method. 12 times 12. Okay? 2 times 2 is 4. And then 2 times this 1 is 2. We put a place value for the 0 here, because we're on the next digits here. Now we have 1 times 2, which is 2. 1 times 1 is 1. Now we add these two numbers together. 4 plus 0 is 4. 2 plus 2 is 4. And 1 comes down. We have 144. Not our final answer because our second one was negative. And so we have a negative here. Negative 144 we should know is our final answer because a positive times a negative is a negative. 11 times negative 6. Well, 11 times negative 6, right, we might know off the top of our head. But we know it's a positive times a negative. And a positive times a negative is a negative. So our final answer needs to be negative. So if I use a traditional method here, 11 times negative 6, we think, okay, 6 times 1 is 6. 6 times this one is 6. And we know our final answer has to be negative because it's a positive times a negative. It's negative. So negative 66 is our final answer. 6 times 5, or 6 times negative 5, times 3. Okay? Well, we have three numbers that were multiplied together. Positive, negative, positive. So there's only one negative in there that's being multiplied across. Our positive times a negative is going to be negative, and that negative product, a negative number multiplied by a positive, is still going to be negative. So our final answer will be negative. Well, let's deal with what's 6 times 5. 6 times 5 is 30, but 6 times negative 5 is negative 30. So we have negative 30 here out of these two, times 3. Okay? Well, if you can do negative 30 times 3 in your head, and we see it's negative 90, that's great. But if we need the traditional method, negative 30 times 3. 3 times 0 is 0. 3 times 3 is 9. We bring down the negative. We have negative 90 as our final answer. 6 times negative 1 times 2. So 6 times negative 1 times 2. Okay. Well, 6 times negative 1 is a fairly simple one. A positive times a negative is a negative. So we have negative 6 here. And we have to bring down the 2. So positive times a negative is a negative, and 6 times negative 1 is negative 6. We brought down that 2. Now, negative 6 times positive 2, a negative times a positive is a negative, and 6 times 2 is 12. And so we have negative 12 as our final answer. 8 times negative 6 times negative 3. Well, I have a positive times a negative times a negative. So eventually two negatives will be multiplied together, and it's all multiplication. So my final answer is going to be positive. But first I want to deal with this 8 times negative 6, right? Well, 8 times 6 is 48. But since we have a positive times a negative, it's a negative 48. We bring down the negative 3. So now we have negative 48 times negative 3. Well, let's use the traditional method here. Negative 48 times a negative 3. Two negatives is going to be a positive when we multiply them together. All right, two wrongs make a right. Well, not really, not in life, but in mathematics they do. Two negatives make a positive. So 3 times 8 is 24. Carry the 2. Right, 2 up there. Oh my goodness, that's 2. 4 times 3 is 12. Plus 2 is 14. So we have 144 down here. And it's positive because two negatives make a positive. That's a 2. That's a bad looking 2. Fix that. Hopefully that's better. All right. Sorry about that. Negative 3 times 6 times a negative 6. Well, first I think, okay, negative 3 times 6, negative 3 times 6. Well, 3 times 6 is 18, so negative 3 times 6 is a negative 18. Because a positive times a negative is a negative. We bring down the negative 6 here, and now we have negative 18 times negative 6. Well, two negatives are going to make a positive, so we know our final answer is going to be positive. So if I use a traditional method, negative 18 times negative 6, we say, okay, 6 times 8, well, that's 48. 8 carry the 4. 6 times 1 is 6, plus 4 is 10, and 108 is our final answer. And it's a positive 108, because two negatives make a positive. 3 times 3 times negative 1 times 3. So we have multiplication across the board, so let's start reading just left to right here. 3 times 3 is 9. I'm going to bring down the negative 1 and bring down this 3. Now remember, between parentheses, if you have a parenthesis and a parenthesis, so parenthesis 3, space parenthesis 3, that's multiplication. So now let's go left to right again. 9 multiplied by negative 1 is negative 9 times this 3 that's going to come down, this last 3. So 9 times a negative 1 is a negative 9. Positive times a negative is a negative, and 9 times 1 is 9. So we have negative 9 here. Negative 9 times a positive 3 is a negative number. Negative times a positive is a negative, and it's negative 27, which is our final answer. Negative 3 times 3 times negative 3 times a negative 3. Okay. A lot of 3's multiplied here. Okay, we have 3 of them are negative, so knowing that's odd, our final answer is going to be negative, so it's all multiplication, but we'll get there. So let's go read left to right. There's multiplication between each sets of parentheses, right? So keep our 3's in line. Negative 3 times a positive 3 is a negative 9. Okay, so 3 times 3 is 9, but a negative times a positive is negative. I'm going to bring down this negative 3, and then this negative 3. Okay, boom, boom. So negative 9 times a negative 3, that's a positive 27. A negative times a negative is a positive. So now we have a positive 27 here, and we have a negative 3 right there on the side. Okay, we bring down this last negative 3, this last one right here. So negative 9 times negative 3 is a positive 27. So now we have 27 times negative 3. Well, I'm going to use the traditional method here, 27 times a negative 3, right? Knowing that a negative times a positive times a negative is going to be a final answer of negative, okay? So 3 times 7 is 21, 1 carry the 2. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 2 is an 8, and we have negative 81 as our final answer. Okay.
Minute Math. When you need help, you use Minute Math. Minute Math. When you need help, you use Minute Math. MinuteMathTutor.com.